and welcome to the Art of Being Human. You know, we are now in the midst of a very terrible pandemic, and nobody knows when it's going to stop. A lot of people have lost their lives. A lot of people have lost loved ones. And so if I watch the news, and I normally do, I understand that there's a lot more increase in anxiety, depression, restlessness, anger, all of the emotions that we don't like to have. And there's even a big increase in the amount of suicides. I can remember, I'm old enough to remember a little bit about the major depression that we had, what was called the Great Depression, when I was growing up. And I can remember some food being rationed, like sugar was rationed, and my mother would talk about that. And I can remember her saying, now, because I was a young child at the time, but I do remember some things about it. And it didn't affect me too much personally, but my mother would say, why is it that Queen Elizabeth can make sure that she has enough sugar to make as many cakes as she wants, and she has a huge birthday cake, and I have even trouble getting enough sugar to make one cake for my family? I can actually remember her saying that. And also, I can remember that the butter, and I'm just, if you're older and you're watching this, you probably can tap into some of the things I'm talking about, because I'm in my 80s. But I can remember the butter came in bags, you know, just like plastic bags, and it was white. And in the middle of it, there was a little round thing, spot, like a large spot, and it was like reddish. And what you do with your hands is you would knead the bag. You know, you wouldn't break the bag, but you'd knead it. And that little ball of whatever it was, that coloring was opened up. And as you kneaded it, it would spread out throughout the butter, and the butter would turn yellow. That's how the butter got to be yellow. It came as white. Now, if you didn't break that and you just use the butter as it was, it would be white butter, not yellow. And then what you do once the butter was yellow, and most people wanted it to be, then you just open the bag and put the butter in bowls. And that was what you did until you had the chance to pick up more butter. And I can remember little rationing cards. They were like green stamps, except bigger than green stamps, if you remember the old green stamps. And you would have to have so many stamps to get this, and so many stamps to get that. And people would get together, well, I need more sugar, so I'll give you this stamp if you give me that stamp, and so forth. And they would kind of switch around. But it was difficult times, and I'm wondering if it's going to be that bad again. Because even now, with a second wave of the pandemic, you can hardly find tissue anywhere. It's stripped bare. People are hoarding. You'd think that they'd never be able to buy another tissue box again. And it's kind of ridiculous, because there is enough. But if you start hoarding because you hoard out of fear, then pretty soon the shelves are bare. And people who don't get there first, or people who are elderly, or people who can't move very fast, they miss out. They can't get half of what they need. But the food supply is okay. So now stores are beginning to ration how much you can buy. It reminds me a little of the rationing in the Great Depression. You had to have so many tickets for this and so many tickets for that. And I'm wondering if that's going to return. I hope not, because there's no need of it at this point. But we are in a terrible crisis mental health-wise. So I'm going to be going back, and I've done things like this before, but I'm going to talk about anxiety and depression and suicide, you know, and what brings it on and all of that. It'll be kind of a long study, because I'm going to be reviewing a lot of things that I've done in the past, but it's all relevant to what's happening now. You know, I can even remember a dogfight. We lived close to a naval shipyard, and we lived close to a major airport, military airport. And I can remember a dogfight between two planes in our backyard. And the thing is, it really made an impression upon me, because we were living on a nice residential street, and our backyard went practically all the way up to the main street in the city, all the way up and the main street of the city was parallel to the street that we were living on. And all of that land was ours, pretty much all of it, until we sold part of it, or my family sold part of it. And sometimes I think planes used to come and practice dog fights. I can remember what one of the planes looked like. It had stripes on it. You'd think I was living a dream, wouldn't you? But it actually happened, and it embedded itself in my memory, and I never forgot it. And the roar of the engines and so forth, and what they sounded like. And they weren't huge planes, but they were reasonably large, but they were military planes. And I'm wondering if they used our backyard as practice sometimes for their military maneuvers, because I could see them. I could see them from my backyard, from the window on my house into my backyard, which I said was very extensive. It went all the way up to the main street, or almost all the way up to the main street. So people and children are affected by all the things that are going on. And they're also saying that a lot of abuse cases are not being reported, because if children are in school, teachers can keep an eye on it. If a child comes in and they're too bruised, or they act like they've been hurt or injured in some way, they can report that. They can have that checked on. Without children in school, there's no one to check on them. So teachers have to keep their eye out when they can. I hope the schools can safely open up, and at some point I'm sure that it will. But until then, it's all rampant. The people who have lost their jobs and they can't get jobs, people who are evicted because they can't pay their rent. And even if the homeowners don't want to evict them, the homeowners have to pay rent too, say for an apartment building. And some people have been evicted from their apartments, not because they didn't pay their rent, but because those who are renting the apartments out didn't pay the rent on the building. So it's amazing how it trickles down and everyone gets affected. Children are affected. They're not seeing their friends. Everyone's wearing masks. Now, you got to remember about masks. Young children need to see facial expressions. It's part of their learning how to socialize in their environment. They see the mom smile. They see the dad smile. They see people cracking jokes and laughing. They don't get those facial expressions to relate to, so that they know how to react in certain situations. So it is damaging to children in terms of their social environment not to be able to see people and their normal expressions. And so we have an effect of this pandemic through all generations, through all ages. And so since the fact that everything is in such trauma right now, and since the government can't seem to get together, Democrats and Republicans, and decide what to do to help, since no one can start to agree with anything on in any way, a manner, agree. So what we got to do is we got to figure out, how can we keep ourselves safe? How can we keep ourselves mentally healthy? What can we do when we're anxious? What's our attitude about things? How can this affect us? And if you just lost your job, or you're in the process of having your home recalled, or your car recalled, then you're in a really bad pickle. But it affects us stress-wise, it affects our emotions, it affects our mental health. And so therefore, I'm taking a step back, and going into all of those kinds of things that are bound to affect us now, because we're a product of our society. You know, our society does this, that, and the other. We're a product of it. Our president does this, that, and the other, and somehow we're the product of it. So I'm going to start in. We're going to talk about the brain a little bit first. I'm not getting deep into the structures of the brain and what they do. This is not going to be a class in physiology of the brain. But what do we expect our brain to do? What can it do? What can't it do? What do we expect it to do? There's a big, big divide here. The brain is an organ, and it does control, to a large degree, our emotions, our reactions to things. But the thing is, it can't make decisions in the sense that it can't force a disease to go away. If we think with our brain, and this is where the issue comes in, we think with our brain, so we think that everything that we think of, our brain can take care of. If I have a personal problem with fear, I don't, but if I did, then why can't I think it away? If I have a case of nervousness, why can't I think that away? I mean, my brain is doing the thinking, it's affecting the way I think, but I can't get rid of it by thinking about it. We are expecting our brains to do more than what they are able to do. The brain is an organ. The brain has blood vessels, and it helps us to think and feel and so forth. And just like other organs, the kidneys, the heart, the lungs, they all do what it is that they are supposed to do. And they do those things well. But the brain can't change something that's physical. It just can't do it. All of the organs have separate functioning. The brain helps us to learn, think, and remember and feel, including our emotions. But it can't change pain. It can register pain, but it can't change pain. If you are emotionally wrought up, you can't say, okay, brain, I can't experience this. I don't want to experience this. Get it away from me. The brain cannot do that. And you've got to remember with the brain, it's very interesting that if you have a problem with fear, the brain registers that fear. If you think about it, whatever you think about, your brain registers as truth. Supposing I came in and I said, well, this is going to be a rotten day because I'm going to be doing something that I don't want to do this afternoon, and I've got to do this, that, or the other. And the brain says, this is a rotten day. I'm going to feel awful because it's a rotten day. There's no wiggle room in the brain for interpretation. Whatever you think, whatever you perceive, whatever you allow your mind to think, that's the brain's truth, and that's what it thinks. It's like a mini computer in a way, except it's a lot more complicated than computers. You put a thought into it, you believe that thought. And as long as you believe that thought, that brain accepts that thought as truth. And it's very difficult to get a person to change their mind. Now, the only way that you can change truth is to be receptive enough so that you're open to discussion, open to different interpretations. But if I say I get up in the morning, I put up the curtain, I look out and it's raining, oh, a horrible day again. It's another rotten day at work. So what do? I actually believe that work is a rotten place to be. I've got a rotten job, I don't want to be here, I hate being here, etc., etc., etc. Now, I never felt that way about any of my jobs. I always loved what I was doing, so was never an issue with me. But for some people, you put a thought in their brain, or they allow a thought to be in their brain without any discourse, without checking to see that it might be wrong. A person puts a thought in their brain, and as far as they're concerned, that's truth. That is actual truth. If I were to think that brown-eyed people are a lot more intelligent than blue-eyed people, and research has been done on this. You can program a person to believe that people with brown eyes are more intelligent than people with blue eyes. It doesn't make any difference what color your eyes are. It has nothing to do with your IQ. But supposing I did an experiment with children, and I kept saying over and over, brown eyes are brighter, brown eyes are brighter. Blue eyes aren't so bright. They're duller. They're not as bright. They're not as intelligent. The child is going to believe that anyone with brown eyes is going to be brighter than anyone with blue eyes, and they're going to believe it for a fact. And as far as the brain is concerned, that's a fact. That's to be believed. Whatever you put into your brain is what you believe as being true. So as a child grows up, if I don't reverse that, of course I wouldn't do an experiment like that anyway, but if I didn't reverse that, a child would grow up and they might choose their friends. Well, brown eyes is brighter than blue, and they might believe that even for the rest of their lives. A lot of prejudice is based upon false ideas that people have been programmed with. And so therefore they continue that belief system all the way through their lives. Now, for most people, they hear different sources, they hear different things, they hear different ideas, and they can kind of weigh the balance. Well, why is blue eyes not as good as brown eyes? I know a person with blue eyes that's college educated. I know a person with blue eyes who turned out to have an amazing career, you know. Maybe they were in atomic science, or maybe they had some kind of a degree that allowed them to do some very highly specialized work. They had blue eyes. They shouldn't be able to do that. They're not as bright. You know, it just goes on and on and on and on. Now, in our personal lives, we have a problem because we expect the brain to do what it cannot do. I have a fear, and I tell myself, I'm not going to fear anymore. I'm not going to fear anymore. I'm not going to be afraid anymore. I'm not going to be afraid when I go to the dentist. I'm not going to be afraid when I go to the doctor. This lump is really not cancer, even though I think it is. And you get so you rehearse in your mind your fear, and then you decide, I don't want this fear anymore, but you can't get rid of it because your brain has been programmed to accept that is the truth. So I get up in the morning and I look at myself and I say, well, I don't look good this morning. I must be sick. I must feel sick. And then I decide, no, I'm not going to be sick. I'm not going to feel sick. Get away from me. I may be sneezing like everything. I might have a cold. I don't have this cold. The brain cannot change anything. You see, you can't think yourself out of a fear. You can't think yourself out of any kind of a bad notion that can't possibly be true. You can't think yourself away from symptoms that you're having. And if you're having nervous symptoms, anxiety symptoms, and things like that, you can't think your way out of them. We think we should be able to do that, but the brain's not geared to do that. And you've got to remember, not only is the brain not geared to do that, but you've got to remember that you have a whole human body, all of it sending signals to the brain. And I use menopause as a good example of this. When a woman gets to be in menopause age, she experiences symptoms. Now, some people don't have many symptoms, and they kind of slide through it. Other people have major symptoms, and it causes them not be able to function very well. And if they think they can stop their symptoms by thinking them away, but they can't, because their body situation is that their estrogen level is too low, and they've got other things going on in their body, and their body is registering all of that, they're experiencing all of that. The brain can't change that. It can't change your physiology. It can't change the things that causing you to feel the way you feel. And the only way that you can feel differently is to respond differently and to gradually acclimate yourself to a different set of truths than what you already have, or a different set, like, okay, I'm nervous today. It's going to be okay. I'm nervous most of the time. I'm trying to think it away. I can't think it away. So what do? I deal with it in terms of understanding that the brain does not know the difference between a real and an imagined fact. Now, with this pandemic, there's a lot of fear. What do people fear? I might not have enough money this month to pay my rent. I might not have enough money to get my medication. I'm getting low on groceries. And so you're thinking about these things, and there's no way that you can stop the situation. It is what it is. But it probably will make it okay. But instead of thinking about that, you think in terms of the negative. What if I don't make it? You know, what if I run out of money? What if I do have to leave my apartment because I can't pay the rent? What if I lose my job? They're downsizing at work. What if? And we have all of those what if fears. You can't get rid of the what if fears because a lot of them are based on reality. So what you have is anticipatory fear. Anticipatory fear is when you fear something that you know might happen. I mean, it's an actual event that might happen. It doesn't mean it will happen, but it could happen. Well, what if I lose my job? What if the business I'm working in closes? I'm thinking about closing down. What if the pandemic actually does happen and we close the schools? I have children. I can't leave them alone to go back to work. How am I going to have child care? I can't afford child care. You are anticipating events that actually could happen. As I say, they might not. But you put a spin on them, and it's usually always the negative spin that you put on them. So therefore you feel like you don't have hope, and you have all of this fear that you're facing. And then what do? You panic. And the brain can't get rid of that panic. It can't get rid of that panic because it's being fed all of the what-if stuff, you know? If I take a bunch of poison in my system, my body's going to react to it. And I can't say, don't react, don't react, don't react. It's going to be okay, don't react. But the poison is still there, and it's still doing its work. So therefore, what we need to deal with is understanding what our emotions are, what we can do, what our bodies can't do very well. How do we make up the difference? How do we live in a world in which fear is all around us? If you have a good, steady job and you're not in danger of losing it, your best bet is to keep it for as long as you can, and you may not ever lose it. But if you fill your mind with fear, I don't know how long this job is going to last. It might not last long enough. I'm not close enough to retirement to be able to depend upon Social Security. What if there's no Social Security? What if the government loses all of its funds and they don't have money to pay Social Security? What am I going to live on? Am I going to be helpless? Am I going to be homeless? Am I going to be on the street? You know, and what do? Well, you have to prepare yourself mentally to be as healthy as you can, because the stress is too much. It's too much for normal people who don't usually feel stress. And that's the kind of thing that the brain on its own can't handle. It can't do things. It can't cause me, if I have a toothache, to think the toothache away. I've got a toothache. I got to get rid of it. Well, my brain is the one that's experiencing it. Well, my tooth is experiencing it too, but it's being registered in my brain. Why can't I tell my brain to remove that? And so I don't feel it anymore. The brain can't do it. Now, maybe under hypnosis the brain could do it, but I think hypnosis is limited. And to depend on hypnosis for a lot of things may not be the wisest choice either. So we have to deal with our fears, what they are, how do we live, and these are the kinds of things which I want to deal with on a fairly long-term basis, because this pandemic is going to last. Now, I know there's topics of getting a vaccine, and it's looking better and better with the vaccine. 58% of the people said they'd take the vaccine when it was produced. The other percent, which is almost 50%, said they wouldn't because they wouldn't trust it. And there's whole segments of society that don't trust inoculations anyway, and they might not choose to have it. Will they spread the disease? If they have it, they could. But if the vaccine is acceptable, why not take it? Why not get life back to normal? But in the meantime, we have to deal with our emotions. What are our fears? What do we deal with them? What does it mean? How do we cope? And that's the kind of things that I want to deal with in this class proceeding. For as long as necessary, we'll go into other things. We'll go into suicidology. We'll go into depression. We'll go into all of that. If you are a very anxious person, the likelihood is that you're going to have depression too. It's not unusual to have both of them together. So I'm going to close it here, and we're going to continue with this as long as necessary. So please join me next time.